Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Stiles, and I have the great privilege of being Dean of UNSW Business School. Today, I'd like to warmly welcome you, alumni, staff, student, friends, and special guests to the first Meet the CEO of 2023. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Bidjigal people, who are the traditional owners of the land on which I am this evening, and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past and present, and their communities who've shared and practiced their teaching over thousands of years. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's ongoing leadership and contributions, including to business, education, and industry. UNSW Business School's mission is to make a difference. And we do this by creating new knowledge to help understand, guide, and shape the future of business, government, and the for-purpose sector, as well as shape the next generation of leaders. And if we believe those who rank and rate us, then it seems we have much to be proud of recently as we pursue our mission. Not wanting to brag, but, for example, for the fourth consecutive year, UNSW was named Most Employable University at the 2023 Australian Financial Review Top 100 Future Leaders Awards. These awards identify Australia's high potential future graduates, and UNSW Business School was well represented with 22 of the 33 UNSW finalists. And in late 2022, UNSW Business School was assessed as the best business school in Australia in the AFR Boss 2022 Best Business School rankings. We also ranked first in career impact, a recognition of the successful career outcomes of business school graduates, which of course is most of you who are attending this evening, including our two guests. And more recently, UNSW achieved an impressive 19th position in the latest QS World University Rankings, a testament to our commitment to transformative education, innovation, and world-leading research, all of which leads to positive societal impact. Okay, that was bordering on bragging, but more importantly, I think the real point is that this reflects the strengths and achievements of our whole community, staff, students, alumni, and all our partners in Australia and internationally. These achievements are collective achievements and something we all share and should be proud of. Now, at this point, I'd normally call for collective applause. On this occasion, I'll leave it to you to cheer, punch the air, applaud, or shout things out that you can only shout out when your mute is on. Meet the CEO is UNSW School's premier leadership series, offering ongoing learning and access to contemporary thinking in business and leadership. Events like Meet the CEO really the importance of lifelong learning and our commitment to it, and are great occasions for all of us to come together, connect, and be inspired. As our special guest today, we are pleased to meet Christian Sutherland Wong, CEO of Glassdoor, who'll be interviewed by Ellen Derrick, Managing Partner of Consulting for Deloitte Australia and a member of the UNSW Business School Advisory Council. She'll be joining us shortly. And thanks to everyone who sent in questions for Christian. We had a huge response, well over 300 questions. We'll do our very best to cover as many of the topics raised as possible in the conversation. Also, be an opportunity to engage with the conversation by sending in your questions through our live Q&A chat function during the event. You can also share your thoughts, comments, and experience about today's event on Facebook and LinkedIn using the hashtag #MeetTheCEO. I note also that we are recording today's discussion and it'll be available after the event on the UNSW Business School website and YouTube channel. We encourage you to share the links with your friends and colleagues who may benefit from the insights that we're going to hear tonight. It's now my great pleasure to welcome David Gonski, AC, Chancellor at UNSW Sydney, to introduce our guest speakers. Thank you and enjoy tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for Meet the CEO. A big welcome to you all. One of the beauties of doing Meet the CEO digital is that it means we can reach our alumni and friends from across the globe. So thank you all for joining us wherever in the world you are. Meet the CEO is always a highlight on the UNSW calendar and is still going strong after 20 years. I have to admit, as I've actually admitted publicly many times, it's one of my favorites, and I'm absolutely certain with the guest we've got tonight, it's going to be a favorite of one of my favorites. Meet the CEO is particularly special when, as is the case tonight, the CEO we're meeting is one of our own, an alumni of the business school. We now have over 100,000 graduates around the world who make up our alumni, and tonight we're very lucky to have one of them being interviewed for us. Today, we're very privileged to have with us Christian Sutherland Wong, who is Chief Executive Officer, as Chris said, of Glassdoor, a world leader in job and company insights. Christian is normally based in Silicon Valley, but he's joining us today from an undisclosed destination in Europe, which I hope he might tell us a bit about. Thank you, Christian, for joining us whilst you're on your travels. We are extremely grateful for you giving us your time. For those of you who don't know, Christian became CEO in January 2020. He was responsible for leading Glassdoor's mission to help people everywhere find a job and a company they love. He joined Glassdoor in 2015 as Vice President and General Manager of Monetization. In 2018, he was appointed as the company's first Chief Operating Officer and was promoted to President in 2019. Prior to Glassdoor, Christian served as LinkedIn's Director of Product, managing its premium subscription business and payment platform, as well as its API program. He also has experience in the business consulting and banking fields. He was honored with a 40 Under 40 award in 2020 by the San Francisco Business Times. Very important to us, Christian graduated from the UNSW Business School with a Bachelor of Commerce degree and received a co-op scholarship in actuarial studies. For those of you who are interested, it's the 35th year of the UNSW co-op scholarship programs, and we're very, very thankful to all those who've participated, both as people who've received those awards, but also those who've financed and assisted in them. Christian holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and was a Baker Scholar. He's also a board member of Toolworks, an organization that helps people with barriers to employment successfully enter the job market. Now, I read a lot of CVs, and I always ask our excellent staff for Meet the CEO to give me an interesting fact that wouldn't normally be read out. Christian's now shaking a bit, but Christian's first job was as an opera singer, performing as a soloist at the tender age of 11 at the Sydney Opera House. Why am I going to listen to Christian? I want to know what he can't do. If you can sing and do business, doesn't leave much more. And I've got to also say that I'd love to hear whether being a singer is useful in the business world. I think we'll hear a lot and a lot more probably with our excellent interviewer, Ellen Derrick. Ellen is one of our AGSM MBA alumni, and she's a member of the Business Schools Advisory Council with leadership experience across government and corporate sectors. She's the Managing Director of Consulting at Deloitte Australia and a member of Deloitte's National Executive. But if that's not enough, she's also chair of Batyr, a for-purpose preventative mental health organization, and a member also, if that's also not enough, of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance of Australia. Ellen, it's a pleasure to have you here, and we're looking forward to watching you talk with Christian about his impressive singing and otherwise career in business. Please join me in welcoming Christian and Ellen.
Thank you so much, David. I'm thrilled to be leading the Meet the CEO conversation tonight with Christian. Obviously very lucky. It is an impressive CEO. I'm coming to you all from Ngunnawal land. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. I'm really delighted to have been asked to host this. I'm feeling very lucky. And Christian, I feel like we should get started with the main event. Welcome. And I think unplanned, I need to start with the first question of where are you coming? Where are you? Where are you coming in from?
Yeah, well, first up, thank you to everybody, and thank you to UNSW. It's such an honor to be invited for this event. So I'm dialing in from Bad Aussee in Austria. My wife's Austrian, and so we've come out here for a big chunk of summer with our kids. So that's where I'm dialing in from today.
Fantastic. Sounds lovely. Now, I think you got the hint that this was a very popular session, lots of questions asked. And of course, I have my own. So I'm going to run through a few. We'll get to some audience questions. But I'm going to start you right back at the beginning, right? Your childhood growing up. Tell us a little bit about your early years, influences, family life.
Sure. So born and raised in Sydney. My mum, the Sutherland in my name, she was a bank teller and worked in commercial lending. And my dad, the Wong in my name, he came to Australia when he was 17. He came from Malaysia by himself. And he was a sound engineer at ABC Radio. I also have a younger sister. And so there's the four of us, working class family, happy childhood. And I think one of the values that my parents really instilled in me and my sister was to apply yourself, and particularly to work hard at school. And they really looked up to professions like being a doctor or a lawyer or a business person. And the path that they painted in order to get there was to do well in school. So my sister and I, we went to the local public primary school. And early on, I remember it was a goal that, from primary school, I wanted to get into high school and wanted to go to a selective high school. So the selective public high school was Sydney Boys High. And so that was the goal. And so work hard in school and you get there. But one thing that kind of took me on to a different path was that I fell into a love of music. And as David mentioned, I started singing professionally when I was in primary school. And so then that opened up another opportunity, which was I got a full scholarship to go to a private school to Scots College in Bellevue Hill, Sydney. And that was amazing because it would pay for both my academic tuition, but even more importantly, for all of my music tuition. And music lessons aren't cheap. And so that was a really big unlock for me. But it also had a kind of an impact on me in a different way, in that I think of my primary school years as being very innocent, everyone being your friend, and then going to Scots and to this private all boys school and feeling different. And it was the first time in my life where I'd actually had racism directly, kind of targeted at me. And, to paint a picture of back in the early 90s when I'm going to high school, this was when Pauline Hanson rose to fame and her maiden speech in Parliament to complaining of Australia being swarmed by Asians. And as a half Chinese boy, it had a big impact on me and my identity. And I felt very uncertain about that. In addition, I'm at a private school and I'm coming from a working class family, and there weren't many working class families there. A lot of wealth. I remember going to friends' houses and they'd have swimming pools and tennis courts. And so I say all of this because, I felt like there was a pivotal time in these early years, in my high school years, where I'd always been applying myself academically, but it now transformed to something else where it now became a point of competition. It now became a way of which I could prove my self-worth of, there's all these kids with privilege around me, but I'm going to be better than them. I'm going to beat them in school. I'm going to have a great career. And that was, me, trying to deal with these insecurities that I was feeling. And if I reflect on a lot of my early career, I think I was driven, with that mentality in mind. And not to paint a one-dimensional picture of me, it wasn't that I was an unhappy kid in high school. I was very happy and feel really fortunate to have gone to Scots and had a wonderful education there and had a lot of good friends. But I still think it had an impact on me and kind of in many ways defined kind of a big part of the type of person who I was, leaving school, going into university and from then on.
Yeah, wonderful. I think, as you advance in your career and you get the benefit of rear view vision, it becomes really clear how those things influence you, right? In your decisions and, through your career as well. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to have to go here, Christian. You're 11 years old. You're performing at the Sydney Opera House. What did that feel like? Unbelievable.
Oh, it was special. And I think that had a big impact on me. Dave was saying it did impact the business world. Well, I think, indirectly in that, I think it's really wonderful if a child can discover something in their childhood where they have a passion for it. And they want to apply themselves to, and it teaches them discipline and the value of working hard at something so you can get better and seeing the results of that. And that was me in singing and music. And it was so special singing at the opera house with professional opera singers. And around me, I have these world-class opera singers who are rehearsing and wanting to achieve perfection. And so therefore instilling in me that desire as a child that I want to work hard at something and I need to lift my game in order to be on stage with them. And I think just so wonderful, because those lessons serve me well beyond just being a singer. And I think of a lot of the values I have around hard work and a lot of the values I have around really pushing, trying to achieve perfection and doing well, probably began in those years, having that experience as a child opera singer.
Yeah, of course. I mean, learning that and experiencing that at that age, phenomenal. Surely that would shape you. Now, tell us a bit about your career journey, right? What drew you to a career in technology? Take us through kind of the path.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I guess my career journey begins at UNSW. And I'd come to UNSW to start actuarial studies with the belief that I wanted to become an actuary. I have extremely fond memories of UNSW. And just as an aside point, like coming from Scots, where I was in school uniform, where it's kind of a culture of being in line and short back and sides and a tie and knee-high socks and polished shoes, or I would have gone to detention, to UNSW, where I felt like a culture of individuality and a culture of diversity, and one where for now I started feeling really proud of my Asian heritage, and loved and lead into the individuality. I remember my first year at UNSW, I dyed my hair blonde just because I could, and shortly after I got an eyebrow ring, and it was just an exploring me and this kind of pent up version of me that I didn't get to explore in my high school years, which was just wonderful. But coming back to my career, as I wanted to be an actuary. I was part of the UNSW program, as was mentioned. So that was great in that I got to do actuarial work experience. And I chose that because I'd always, in addition to loving music, I also loved math, and particularly probability and statistics, and wanted to find a way I could apply that in a career. And so being an actuary seemed like a good path. But in my second year at UNSW, there was a UNSW alum who was a management consultant. And he had a big project with Lion Nathan, one of used to be one of Australia and New Zealand's biggest beverage companies at the time. And he needed some help. He needed some kind of Excel grunt work to be done. And so he contacted the university. And so an administrator put me in touch. And so I worked on this project with him. And that was transformative in that, not that only did I do the back office Excel analysis, but he brought me along to the meetings. And so here I was in the boardroom of Lion Nathan, and kind of such an experience to get to talk directly with executives and present my work. And I remember he talked to me afterwards. His name was John. John said to me, Christian, if you go down the actuarial path, I'm not sure you'll be getting into the boardroom anytime soon. It's going to take years for you to work your way there. But if you become a management consultant, you'll do that straight away. And so that seed was planted. And by the time I finished my time at UNSW, I decided I want to be a management consultant for those reasons. So I joined Bain, and it lived up to a lot of what it was meant to, what it promised around giving me this exposure to executives, having global travel and all the rest. And so it was exciting for a person in their early 20s. But it's also pretty hard work, as I'm sure you're aware, Ellen, and the travel got tiring. And I got to a point 2 years in where I was like, I'm not sure I want to do this forever, but I'm still not sure what I want to do. So that was what led me to do an MBA at Harvard, and to give me time to think through where to go next. Now, in 2007, when I went to do the MBA, I joined Facebook, but nobody in Australia at the time was really on Facebook. It was more of a US thing. And I remember coming back a year later in the summer break, and all of my friends in Australia were on Facebook. Everybody. I'd walk through Sydney Airport. I'd look over people's shoulder, they'd be on their laptop, and you'd see that, that blue bar across and the Facebook icon. Everybody was using Facebook intensely. And I could just see that this was a part of a bigger social networking movement that was going to change human behavior. And I could see it was already changing the way we communicate. So when I went back to Harvard second year, I decided I'm going to do a bunch of tech courses. I enrolled in a social networking class. And then I got more of an appreciation for LinkedIn, because LinkedIn was kind of the underrated social network at the time. And so I ended up joining LinkedIn after my MBA at Harvard, and And that was a great decision in that, I joined very early at LinkedIn as a couple of hundred people. We then grew massively to, in the 5 years I was there, I think I left, it was like 8,000 people, and we've gone public. And I got to run a big part of LinkedIn, which is an opportunity that came because LinkedIn was growing so fast. So I was running a business line and had kind of more general management opportunities through that. And so that was a really wonderful experience, and took some time off after LinkedIn. And then I ended up joining Glassdoor, which is where I am today, because I love the mission of Glassdoor and what Glassdoor stood for. And so that's been my journey.
Very good. And that took you to being the CEO of Glassdoor. Some impressive names there, Christian, I'll tell you that. But then you became CEO, the timing, right? January 2020, right on the cusp of a very challenging time. Tell us a bit about that. How did you navigate COVID? Like, I'm sure you went into that with a particular set of priorities, right? How did that change?
Oh, totally. I mean, I went into January 2020 with a very different view of the world and what ended up, how things played out after then. I was full of hope, and Glassdoor was growing fast, and we had 1,000 employees across 7 countries around the world. We just opened up an office in Paris, and I just in January flown out to open the Paris office. We'd just taken out all this amazing space in San Francisco for double the amount of headcount of what we had at that time, with the expectation we'd grow into it. And then, this thing we'd been hearing about in December, and then January, and then February, by March, it was here. And we at first sent everybody home, and we said, okay, we're going to hunker down and get through this. And we thought, okay, look, we'll be back at home for like 2, maybe 4 weeks. But that time came and went. And one of the scariest things for us at Glassdoor was that we make all of our money today through recruiting. And one thing that almost every company across the world did when COVID hit was they stopped recruiting, hiring freezes. And that meant that our revenue basically dried up overnight. And that was a pretty scary proposition, to be looking down the barrel of no revenue for a really extended period with no end in sight. So a crisis like this, I think, one of the biggest learnings is that you're forced to prioritize, and you're forced to pick a lane and where you're going to focus on. You can't do everything. And at the time, Glassdoor had kind of multiple business lines. And we'd also started talking about laying the foundations for a new strategy and a strategic shift for the company. But we expected that shift to happen over the course of a couple of years. And so we then made the decision that what was going to be the right thing to do for us was to lean hard into that new strategy, accelerate into it, but also shut down some other parts of what had previously been core, which we didn't see as being core when we looked at the long-term view of Glassdoor. And that was a hard decision. It also meant that we went through layoffs. And I'd never in my career up to that time been firsthand to layoffs. And now here I was, this is a new CEO, having to deliver layoffs to the company. Absolutely the hardest thing I've ever done in my career. I still remember the day vividly when we announced to the company we were doing the layoffs, and we had to do it via Zoom because, obviously not together. And I remember turning off the Zoom call and just bursting into tears. And now I can look back on that and say, well, look, the decisions we made back then have seemed to be the right ones. The new strategy is we have momentum in it, and it's working well for us. But yeah, absolutely one of the hardest things to have done, and not something that I hope to have to do many times in my career. But I certainly a lot of learnings, baptism of fire in taking over the CEO in 2020.
Yeah, well done. The courage in that decision making, right, to accelerate, right, even at a really difficult point. There's a lot to learn from that, I think. I love Glassdoor's mission. Like, if you stood back and said, what sets Glassdoor apart, right, from other job search websites? What are the things? What sets it apart?
Yeah, I think what Glassdoor stands for is being squarely on the side of the job seeker and the employee, and trying to kind of, even the playing field between companies and job seekers. And, with a realization that typically before Glassdoor, companies knew all this information about you, but you had real trouble getting that information about the company. You wouldn't know what it's like to actually work there. You wouldn't know what you should get paid. And so Glassdoor changed all this. And so we've developed to become the leading place for workplace ratings and reviews, and also for salary sharing, ultimately driving workplace transparency. And so that's what sets us apart.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when Glassdoor started, and, I've spent a lot of time in my life at different points on Glassdoor, right, learning about different organizations, including my own. But, how do you stay competitive, right? There's new social platforms, there's new ways to find that information. How do you maintain your competitive edge and stay relevant, which you very much have?
Yeah, look, I have the point of view that for a company like ours, and really for any company, I think it's innovate or die. I don't think there's a choice. And I think history is littered with companies, and particularly tech companies, who've had a great first chapter, but then been disrupted and then faded off into the distance. And so that's not the fate I want to have for Glassdoor. And so we are constantly looking outwards around what are the new consumer trends, what are the new needs, and what should Glassdoor's response be to that? We began 15 years ago, and it was a different environment back then. Around websites were the dominant way in which people access the internet, and mobile was just starting to get going, versus today where behaviors change and everything's very mobile dominant. So we've over time shifted to innovating much more in our mobile apps. I think the other major change that we look at is just this shift to hybrid and remote work. It's probably the biggest disruption in the workplace in decades. And for a company that's all about helping people find jobs at a company they love, and about workplace culture, it has a big opportunity for us as well to be able to now redefine what Glassdoor means for people, be able to often help, these new needs they have where they're not connected as much to their colleagues in person. They're feeling increasingly disconnected and lonely. And we hear about people writing about that on the reviews on our platform. And so that's a big area for focus for us. And again, it all comes with this mantra and this value of innovation that we just need to keep up.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, you're doing well. Now, I've always admired Glassdoor for your, really being at the forefront of radical transparency. And I say that before that was something that we all talked about, right? Before it was truly in vogue, right? What were the early challenges with that? You guys were the pioneers in a really different level of transparency. Like, what challenged you early on with that?
Yeah, I can tell you one of the biggest challenges early on was that companies hated us. They wish with Glassdoor would just go away. And, we had the audacity to put companies on notice where we were now rating them. We were rating also not just them, but also rating their CEOs. We were allowing people to share salaries. And so all this power that companies had over employees where they knew the salary, but the employee didn't, was now being squared up. And so it was, no doubt a challenge for us of how do we connect with companies. But what we've seen over the years is that companies have come on a journey with us. And now we see that the best companies, they really start to embrace Glassdoor. They realize that if they create a great employee experience and they can get their employees to come and talk about it on Glassdoor, then that's going to be great for their employer brand. And I often talk to business leaders and try and talk through that it is a false dichotomy to think that you can either be a profitable company or be nice to your employees. And in fact, the two go hand in hand, where if you treat your employees as an important stakeholder and create a great experience for them, that's actually going to help you drive shareholder returns. We also have a ton of data. So we've got more than 500,000 companies across the world rated on our platform, tens of millions of reviews for these companies. And we've done research on the data, and we've opened up our data to academic institutions as well. What we find is this great result where you actually see that the best rated companies on Glassdoor outperform other companies when it comes to shareholder returns. And not only is there a correlation, but there seems to be causation as well, meaning that if you can improve your Glassdoor score, that will lead you to then having better shareholder returns. And I think that's a profound result. And one of the lasting legacies of what Glassdoor has delivered to the world is to help business leaders around the world see that being great with your employees is actually great for business.
Yeah, fantastic. I fully agree. So you're speaking to a lot of us, different sectors, on that issue of transparency. Like, what's your advice? What can the rest of us learn from that?
Yeah, I think embrace it. It seems scary at first, but the more you embrace it, I think the more you will see how powerful it is. in the most basic sense, I think transparency is, just a way of which you provide more information to people, treat them like adults and let them make informed decisions. The old style of, thinking of companies hierarchically, of which people only get the information of what they need to know. I think companies like that end up underperforming companies where you're more open with your information. You treat your employees, and in a knowledge worker-based economy, treating people as adults and as people who you want to get the most out of, and empowering them to make decisions with more information is ultimately better. And then many of the things that we get scared about when it comes to transparency, like, once if everyone knew my pay, well, it seems like a scary thing, but if you actually do it, and we at Glassdoor, we publish not individuals' pays, but we publish the pay range for every single role at our company on the job description, but also to all of our employees. So everybody knows where they sit relative to other employees. And it seemed like a scary proposition at first, but when we did it, the world didn't blow up. Nothing really happened. People just had more information, and they appreciated it. And I think, and over time, I think it means that people can make better career decisions they can choose their path, or they can choose the type of job they want, knowing the full information on what you get paid and what that job entails. And I think it's just generally a very, very good thing. So that would be the way I'd encourage most people just to embrace it. Jump on in.
I love it. Very topical advice. I'll take it. Thank you very much. But I feel, between your roles at LinkedIn, now at Glassdoor, I feel like you have these deep insights into many different organizations, right? Really unique. It truly gives you different insight into shifts in broader recruitment, into talent markets. Over time, with that level of insight, how in any way has that changed your leadership style?
I think there's certainly, from Glassdoor's platform, you see the types of leaders who seem to do well, where they have great relationships with their employees. They seem to inspire their employees. And I think there are learnings from that. But frankly, if I were to think of where I get most of my leadership, where most of my leadership development has come from, and how my style has changed over time, I'd say it's more from internally looking at the leaders within LinkedIn and Glassdoor, where both were companies that had done really well and attracted great leaders. And I just learned so much from just observing them. I think of the early version of me as a leader was probably the type of person, and I know this was how I viewed leadership, was I thought that my role as a leader is to make the right business decisions. And I think early on I had success and in getting more responsibility because I was doing well at making the right business decisions and leading to good results. But I didn't appreciate the value of relationships. If you describe me, I was probably a leader who was described as impatient or intense, quick to judge. And I started to see the leaders above me in these companies that there was a different style that they employed to be more effective with larger groups of people and to get the best out of their people. And if I describe now how I view leadership, I think of it much more around how do I create the conditions for others to succeed? And I have great inquiry into when I'm seeing things that don't seem to be working well. I'm not quick to judge on, well, that's not working or that person's incompetent, to trying to figure out, well, what is it that's going on, or what conditions am I potentially creating that's not creating the right outcome here? And I've had examples where I've had leaders who've struggled with me, where there's a side of me where I love to talk out loud and debate both sides. But for some people, that can be confusing. It doesn't give clarity on where I stand. And so I've adjusted my style, and then I've seen that transform the effectiveness of somebody, where all of a sudden they've gone from seem to be, struggling with their leadership to all of a sudden they're flourishing and their team is flourishing because, I've changed the conditions in how I've approached them and their teams as well. So I'd say in general, that's kind of been probably one of the biggest leadership lessons for me, is to have more inquiry, to focus on building relationships, to take the longer, play the longer game, realizing that people, if they have a relationship with you, they will walk over hot coals and move mountains for you if they feel inspired. But if you're treating them transactionally, you're not going to get the best out of them. And so this appreciation certainly came from seeing great leaders around me, and then also finding the style that worked for me.
Yeah, fantastic. Great reflections in that. I love it. And, different styles at different points. That's lovely. I mean, you're clearly a pioneer, right? Bold, innovator, pioneer as well. Let's talk emerging technology. We can't not, right? Greater emergence of AI, in particularly generative AI. How is that impacting Glassdoor? Like, how are you embracing it? How are you seeing it?
Yeah, I think AI, and particularly generative AI, is transformational in that I think it's transforming how people really start to understand and get a real taste for how impactful AI is going to be in all of our lives, and certainly in the job market as well. We've been talking about AI for a long time, even prior to this wave of generative AI. But I think it's when generative AI came out, people started to really, for the first time, grok that how AI and how this technology can really replace human tasks at scale and at a speed that's just unfathomable. For Glassdoor internally, I mean, we're still figuring out the applications of, I think there's some basic low-hanging fruit around using generative AI for helping people with their resume, or for job descriptions, or for interview practice, or for how to quickly summarize information on Glassdoor so you can get to, an answer you're trying to get to. These are basic applications, but we talk a lot more about AI within Glassdoor in the context of how it's going to change the future of work. Today on Glassdoor's platform, and for most job sites, you'll see that one of the most sought after jobs, most advertised job positions is for driver jobs, for truck drivers, Uber drivers, Amazon delivery drivers. And at the same time, we know there is this wave of automation coming in when it comes to self-driving vehicles. And so you imagine when this comes, there's going to be a tectonic shift of the workforce, and at speeds that really we've not seen before, really unprecedented. And that's just one example. There are so many ways I think that AI is going to change the types of tasks. Now, in my point of view, and the point of view shared of a lot of people in the industry, I think, is that it's not necessary that AI will simply take away jobs, but I think what's going to do is that for every job taken away, there'll be at least one, if not more, jobs that are opened up. And that's generally what we've seen as new technologies have come in over time, is that, yes, some jobs fade away, but many new jobs will come. And so I think it becomes even more important for platforms like ours to start thinking about what's our role in helping people identify the jobs of the future, or our role in helping people retool themselves so they can be relevant in the jobs of the future. And I don't think it's just a Glassdoor opportunity. I think it's really an opportunity for a lot of innovation in this space, and for many new startups to hopefully sprout up, because there's going to be increasing demand for this. And I think we're all starting to get a taste of how rapidly this next wave is coming.
Yeah, excellent. I fully share your perspective. Are you seeing, jobs or perspectives on that shift already?
We've been starting to look at, are there any job descriptions that seem to have changed in the recent kind of months or last year or so. And one of the ones we looked at was, around kind of creative writers and copywriters. And funnily enough, but we're still looking into the data, but we have seen a drop in copywriter jobs on our platform, and where our hypothesis is that we're wondering, it could be macro related, but it also could be that people are now trying to test many of these things using generative AI. So that's just a taste for how quickly I think these things can move. And we're not yet sure that it is a generative AI trend, but that's that's something that we have firsthand insight into. But we certainly see when it comes to Glassdoor reviews, a lot more mentions of AI, and for a long time now, and it's even skyrocketing, the desire for machine learning engineers and other practitioners who can build AI into your products is in huge demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would think, you would start to see some of those trends, right, emerging. We certainly are. Great opportunity, right, for this audience, for the university, for all of us, what you talk about just in terms of reskilling and that transition as well, right? Really important. Now, Christian, I'm going to pivot you a little bit. You've got a big job, right? You've done a lot of things. You've got significant demands on you. How do you keep yourself well?
I have a much greater appreciation for it now than I did, 10, 20 years ago. Early career, I would describe as kind of burning the candle at both ends, and very work hard, play hard mentality, working long hours. When I'm not working, there's a lot of having a great social life. Today I invest a lot of time in my well-being. I have a morning routine which is very dedicated to my wellness, and a big part of that, not just is exercise, but also meditation as well. And that journey began in 2014. After I left LinkedIn, I took a year off with my wife, and we traveled. And one of the things we did in that year off is we were in Malaysia, and we did a 10-day silent meditation retreat. We'd not really done meditation before that, and it was like was jumping in the deep end. And it was profound in that, since then I've had a meditation practice. And for me, meditation is just so impactful, not just for mental well-being, although I think it helps with that, but it's also just, it helps me have greater awareness of my reactions to things, create more space between an input coming in and my, sudden reaction to that, and being able to kind of think through what, how I want to show up. And I think as a leader, it's so important within the work context. I think it makes me a better husband, a better friend, certainly a better dad. And then having kids, for most people, who've had kids, I think that everyone realizes how profound that is, and certainly changed my priorities around what's important in my life. And so where, putting all my hours into my career, all of a sudden didn't seem as important, or it felt like the right, balance of where I spend my time. And so, I'm very, very grateful for the lessons I've learned becoming a father. And so I spend a lot of time with my family. It gives me great joy, spending time with family and the kids. And so that's how I have balance. And the last thing I just say is that, it's interesting that I'd say my work and life have become more integrated as well. Imagine you, Ellen, you have a similar experience where, at some point you might try and compartmentalize early on in your life, it's just work or play, but now it's much more fluid, and that suits me well. I don't feel the need to compartmentalize as much, but with that fluidity, it allows me to have more time to be balanced, while still not feeling like I'm disconnected.
Excellent. Appreciate your morning formula too. It's a good one. I really appreciate you sharing that. Okay, we are going to transition to audience questions. It's gone that quickly. Before we do, okay, I'm gonna throw a couple rapid fire questions at you. Don't overthink them. You can go quickly. We'll run through them very quickly. What's the best advice you ever got?
Intention, not attachment.
Very good. Worst advice?
Worst advice was to not take a year off out of my career after LinkedIn.
Very good. If you weren't CEO, sorry, what would you be doing?
Probably something in music. That was something I departed from at the end of my high school years, that I always think back and think about what if.
Well, we know reliably you could do that. And last one, you kind of went there, but favorite UNSW memory?
Oh boy. I lived on campus at Baxter College, and that was back then. I'm not sure what its reputation is today. It used to be the party college, and so many of the friendships and the parties that I had with that group of people were some of the best and most formative experiences of my life. So I certainly had a wonderful time at Baxter.
Oh, that's very good. Okay, I'm going to kind of keep you there. We have a great question that's come in around how did your time at University of New South Wales help you best prepare for your career? And then what advice would you give to current students at the beginning of their career journeys?
Yeah, well, I came to UNSW with a different view on my career, thinking I was going to become an actuary. And so in some ways, it wasn't that I was the training I got from UNSW led to prepare me for that, but certainly, there's a lot of hard skills you learn in the business school, in the classes in economics and accounting, and that are so great for when you're in the business world. And I'm constantly surprised at for so many business people how they don't have a good grounding of general accounting principles and how much it really helps you. And so I think that from hard skills, the analytical skills and the accounting skills and economic skills I still use today. But more broadly, I think the softer stuff around just the experiences I had, the diversity of experience I had, and getting to know what other people were doing, and having a broader appreciation for things going on in the economy. You know, I didn't have a technical degree while I was at UNSW, but I got an appreciation for tech and got to do some tech classes. So that kind of planted a seed that was later useful for me. And then being part of the UNSW co-op program was also really important. And I think the work experience is really valuable. And to your question around like what's the advice I would give, I would say whether it's part of the co-op program or otherwise, if you can get work experience before going into the workforce, I think it's really valuable in that as a person who's gone from high school to university, you've had exposure around families, you've had exposure around school environments, now exposure around university environments, the workplace is really different. And the norms and what's going to help you, do well in that environment cannot really, I think, be learned in the classroom so easily. And so having one internship before you join your first job, your first real job, I think will be really rewarding. I found just my first internship, I learned so much about just like how the workplace works that, I think it helped me really hit the ground running by the time I got to having my first real job. So that'd be my advice.
That is very good advice. Now we have a great question from a student. I'm going to tell you this has been asked more than once. What does the day in the life of a CEO really look like?
It's varied, and there's no one day. I guess what's consistent is my wellness practice. So I spend about an hour and a half with a mixture between exercise and meditation. Also, I do a cold plunge, and that's something that's also become part of my recent wellness practice, and love it. Highly recommend it if you're brave enough. And then, my day, I think what's different from when I wasn't a CEO is that there's less of my time is about creating, and more of my me firsthand creating, and much more of my time is around kind of working with other people as they create, and to us to kind of build together. And it's a lot more, I feel like my life is now a little bit more meeting heavy than it used to be. But I value those meetings in that there's meetings which are about me having connectivity with people, and I think the relationship building is so important. And there's about me staying in touch with what's going on in the company, and so having that ear to the ground is really important. And then there's also me looking externally and having meetings outside of the company so that I'm looking outward and learning about how customers are feeling about us, or what are the trends of things going on, and that's important. And then the last thing I try and do is I try and block time as well for thinking time, because quickly all of your time can be taken up, and people, if you allow, people will take over your calendar. So I generally block a couple of hours in the day to try and have thinking time. I don't always get to use that time. Sometimes other things come up, but that's just for free form thinking. I might go for a walk, or just kind of allow that to organically happen, not put a lot of pressure on myself to actually have to solve something in that time. But that's a pretty typical day. And then I'm generally on outside of hours, but I also try and maintain some boundary in that, if something comes in and doesn't seem like it's critical, I'll let it slide to the next day. And certainly on the weekends, I try to set an example also for the rest of the team to not be contacting each other too much on the weekends, so that people do get time to recharge and to rest. And I generally benefit from that as well.
Yeah, excellent. That's fantastic. And I admire the blocking out of space, right? Great advice. And really, the discipline of doing that, it makes a difference. Now, question for you around the evolving role of the CEO. All right, so CEOs of today, very different than traditional CEOs. You've already spoken a lot to that. Technology, access to best information, empowered employees asking questions, challenging decisions. How do you see that evolving, the role of CEO?
Yeah, I think all those things you said are true. I think CEOs today have a greater appreciation for their role to engage employees. It's not just command and control. It's much more around your effectiveness at building relationships and inspiring and creating a great workplace. And CEOs now realize that that's actually that's the formula to success. I think the other big one we've seen recently, which has been a trend for a while, but particularly, funnily enough, it also started for me, I think, a lot of us point back to around the 2020 timeframe, was that increasingly people are looking for CEOs to talk about not just what's going on in their company, but also to They want their CEOs to be leading even in, when it comes to social fields and social issues of the day. And I don't think the things have played out in exactly what is the role of CEOs in this space. And I think you have different points of view on some points of view that CEOs should stick to their lane and just focus on the business, and other CEOs who feel very comfortable about leading and speaking on a range of social issues. But irrespective of which lane you choose as a CEO, what I can tell you is true is that employees are wanting you to do that. They're wanting to hear leaders speak out. Today, if you look at it, we looked at recent Harris Poll research where when there's a leadership void in our lives, historically people look to the politicians or they look to religious leaders to provide leadership and guidance on these issues. And today there is more skepticism towards leaders in these areas and more people looking to business leaders. And if you look at Glassdoor reviews, you see so much chatter around employees wanting their company to take a stance, or feeling dissatisfied when the company is not taking a stance, or not raising their game when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and matters like that. And so it's clearly employees want it. I think CEOs are still figuring out, how do you do this effectively while, still at the end of the day, making sure that, your primary position is to lead the company, not necessarily to be a leadership in broader fields. But I think there's a lot of spillover, and I think there's a lot for all of us as leaders to figure out.
Yeah, great. Now, just advice for someone currently looking for a job, right? Emerging leaders looking for a job. What's your advice?
I'd say go to Glassdoor and do your research. We are in an interesting macroeconomic environment right now. It's a little shakier than what it's been, say, for the last decade. Where I felt like actually the job seeker was pretty empowered in the last decade with such an economic boom. But even today, you see fairly low levels of unemployment across most countries around the world, and I think there's something structural here around. We are seeing that with aging population and there's differences in participation rates that. There is just, I think, a structural difference in how the economy works today than is what it was 2 decades ago. And so I think we're going to have relatively low unemployment rates for a while. And so that does empower job seekers. And I would say, therefore, be choosy. Do your research. I think the worst thing that I can see on a job application to say coming for somebody who wants to work at Glassdoor is a person who hasn't done their homework, who doesn't really know much about my company, which means that I don't trust that they're going to be a thoughtful person, but also I think they're not doing themselves a service, because there are platforms like ours which will help you identify a job and company you're going to love, and so go do your research on Glassdoor and take advantage of the fact that you should for many fields. There's a lot of opportunities today.
Yeah, wonderful. An opportunity to go into those situations incredibly empowered, right? Which I do think is fantastic advice. Now back to you a bit. How do you keep yourself motivated, right? I can feel the energy. How do you keep yourself motivated? What's your next goal in your career?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it a little bit. I'd say my view on how career fits into my life has evolved. Mm-hmm. And often when I think about what's next, I'm not just thinking about my career, I'm also thinking a lot about how my family. And I would say now my number one job is to be a great dad. And so that weighs heavily into the decisions that I think about, where to go next. But this balance also, the paradox of having more of this balance has also meant that I feel like I show up better as a leader. I don't necessarily need to bring that intensity to my leadership in order to succeed. And so, what gives me a lot of motivation right now at Glassdoor is that I love the company I work at. I love the people. I love what we stand for. And I also love that, I took over the company from the founder of the company, who was the entrepreneur who was, the person who shepherded Glassdoor through a lot of growth in the first decade. And now it's my role to take over. And I feel I've inherited this really incredible asset, this treasure that I want to make sure thrives, and also have an opportunity to leave my fingerprints on this company for decades and generations to come. And so that gives me a lot of inspiration as well. And so that's where I draw a lot of inspiration, is just loving the job I'm in, and also thinking about other possibilities outside of work with family life that could be in the years ahead.
Excellent. We have a question around, what would you tell your 20-year-old, 30-year-old self? I'm actually going to flip the question a little bit. rather than that question. You've probably been asked that before, so I want to do it a little differently. What would your 20 or 30-year-old self say about you now? If that looked forward, what would they say about you? They'd be surprised, or what might surprise them?
I think my 20 and 30-year-old self would be probably, frankly, happy that I made it to be CEO of a company. Because I think although it wasn't an explicit ambition, it was somewhere in there in my ambitions. But probably surprised, and just how priorities change. My 20-year-old self certainly was much more career focused, would be more wealth focused and wealth accumulation, and not such an appreciation for family life, for relationships around me. I'd even say not even such an appreciation for not just my family, my wife and my kids, but also my parents and my sister, and a renewed appreciation for them now that I'm a dad. And so I think that would maybe surprise, or it was certainly not on my radar when I was in my 20s, of the importance of these people in my life.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I hope that person would be rightly proud of you. We're going to end on one last question, and it's this. You took us through some challenging times, right? Particularly during COVID, layoffs, reflecting that being, probably the most difficult, challenging moment, right, of your career. Finish us with, what's been the most meaningful, most rewarding? What are you most proud of in your career today?
When I see other people flourish around me, I mentioned, an example of where I changed, sort of how I was showing up for a person and help them flourish. But more broadly, right now, as I look at my leadership team at Glassdoor, I just feel like everyone's hitting their stride, and I feel just so proud of the team, and I know that I've had a part to play in selecting this team and creating the conditions around for how this team operates. And so that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, is when, it just feels like everything's, we're all rowing in the same direction, when people are motivated, when people are really happy to be at your company, that gives me a ton of satisfaction.
Okay, great answer. Everyone, thank you so much for your questions. And Christian, thank you for your candor, openness, and just a phenomenal amount of insight. I'm inspired. I'm energized to go, got all the energy to go watch the Matildas, and you've convinced me on the cold plunge. So thank you very much. Need to add that into the routine, but I honestly can't thank you enough. But I did want to welcome Amy Chang, who's Strategy and Operations Manager for Uber, and also a University of New South Wales Business School actuarial alumna. We've got a theme, and co-op scholar. To give the vote of thanks. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Ellen. So as you mentioned, my name is Amy, and I am delighted to be giving the vote of thanks this evening. And thank you again, Christian and Ellen, for a fascinating conversation. To acknowledge our gratitude, a donation will be made to the UNSW Business School Educational Resource Access Scheme on your behalf. This scheme supports the inclusion and success of students from equity groups enrolled at UNSW Sydney in their first-year undergraduate business programs. I would also like to thank our live stream audience, many of whom submitted questions for Christian, and I particularly enjoyed listening to you answer them with that energy. I also admired your emphasis on the importance of constant reflection and personal improvement from a career perspective, and noticing that career pivot after noticing Facebook in Sydney Airport to redefining Glassdoor, and even just your leadership style and changing that once noticing those above you. Just keeping your eyes open and taking the time for retrospection can just reshape your career and your life. And as mentioned, Christian and Ellen's interview has been recorded, and the full business interview will appear on the UNSW Business School's YouTube channel, as well as the Business School website. This brings the Meet the CEO to a close. We hope you found the evening valuable and are taking away some new learnings, and I for sure will be taking meditation and introspection to my own personal life and career. Thank you all for attending, and goodbye.